Tibor Varady was Minister of Justice in the federal government of Yugoslavia in 1992 as member of the Panic government. He is ethnic Hungarian from the province of Vojvodina. How you became a member of the ethnic minority, the Hungarian ethnic minority, into the federal government of Yugoslavia? Was it actually a symbol in that time falling apart country to have an ethnic minority person as Minister of Justice?
Well, this was a rather unusual situation, and what actually happened was that I did become a member of a government, but this was a government without true power. What happened was that when Milosevic was gaining brutal power, and when the conflicts in Yugoslavia started to become more and more serious and dangerous, then there was some sort of a deal which never became public. So I'm combining knowledge with guessings. And according to this deal, the West was maybe putting less pressure on Milosevic if Milosevic would allow a federal government of experts. Now, this government was chosen by a parliament in which Milosevic had an absolute majority. So it was not a government which was fitting to the parliament, but a government of experts. The issue was, and whether this government could gain real power, and the chance for real power were elections on December 20th, 92. So this government started in July 92, and the elections were supposed to either confirm and make it a real government or to end it. So this is how I became a member of a government, essentially on the ground of being a legal expert. And this is why Panic was an American businessman. He appreciated the fact that I had a Harvard degree, and I think this was the main ground I became a member of the government. The December elections were quite interesting, and although Panic was having a huge handicap in the media was absolutely for Milosevic, Panic was doing quite well, but not well enough. And after he lost the elections, our government of experts fall apart, and from January 93, 2 weeks after the elections, I started to teach at Cornell.
As the first Harvard student from the Middle Europe since the Second World War, how were your experiences in the USA, and how big cultural shock was the USA at that time measured to the Tito Yugoslavia?
Well, let me first mention that the fact that I was coming from Yugoslavia was at that time an advantage, because Yugoslavia was a much milder version of communism than other countries. So my colleagues and members of my generation from Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia and other countries had no chance. I had a chance. So this is why I was at that position. It was between 67 and 69. These were very, very exciting and interesting years in the whole world, I would say, and in America as well. There were all kinds of cultural movements. There was the Vietnam War. And I mean, Harvard was and is and remained an absolutely intellectual top. And so I had a very, very active and interesting life. I met many people who became or were already famous people and interesting people. I became friends of many people. I saw cultural events. So I think it was, and plus of course I had to devote a lot of time to study and to pass exams. So it was a very, very important section of my life.
What are your feelings and thoughts on the NATO war in Yugoslavia? Because on one side there was the Milosevic era, what was a repressive era and what was also actually turning your government over. And on the other side, the NATO was bombing your country with the goal to end this repressive government. What's your opinion on this case and situation?
That's a difficult question. Milosevic was a monster, there is no dilemma about it. Let me mention that I never really had a coffee with him, but we were studying at the Belgrade Law School about the same time. And I had a friend who knew him better. And once he told me something interesting. At that time Milosevic was not yet a monster, but he was already trying to have a political career and he was investing everything. And this friend of mine said that Milosevic is a man who never lies. And I said, does it mean that he's so honest? And he said, no. It means that he's a man who believes whatever he says. Even if he says the opposite of what he said yesterday, he firmly believes it. So he had an uncanny talent of not only of impressing himself, and so he believed what he said, and this made him somewhat more persuasive. But to return to your question, before the NATO bombing, the Milosevic power was already being shaken. There were local elections, which were very negative for Milosevic, and there were growing hopes that the Yugoslav opposition will take power. And this hope was growing, and then came the NATO bombing, and then for a while Milosevic was regaining power and authority for about a year. Now whether the NATO bombing stopped a process or whether Milosevic would have stayed in power anyway, that's very, very difficult to say. The NATO bombing was not focusing on Kosovo, but on various parts of Yugoslavia. There were many, at that time a special word was crafted, collateral damage. And it was a somewhat odd word, but there were many victims, including a synagogue, including a hospital, including the Chinese embassy. But it was also directed against Milosevic, who did have a brutal power. So it is not easy to have a completely one-sided opinion. I think one has to have a balanced opinion here.
How is the current situation of Serbia, upon your opinion, about the Kosovo and also the statehood of Kosovo, whether it's legally rightful or not, and the Serbian position of it is legally rightful or not, and also whether this position of Serbia to have in the same time close relationships to Russia and the EU as well, and also to go for the candidacy and go for the membership of the European Union, and in the same time also having the position of a strong European ally of Russia is to hold, or how is it, in which direction can it go to escalate?
Well, I am not a voter of the present Yugoslav government, and but I have to say that this is not an easy question. On one hand, it is clear that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is something that has to be condemned legally and morally as well. On the other hand, it yielded a polarization which is sometimes losing some boundaries. To condemn Putin is one thing, not to allow Russians to play in Wimbledon is another thing. So this drift of polarization is sometimes taking even the right side beyond logic. And polarization is one of the major dangers for logical thinking in the world, and it has always been one of the major dangers. So one has somehow to condemn what needs to be condemned, but one should not be drifted away with polarization. And this is not an easy task.
Currently, you are not teaching anymore, just as a professor emeritus. You keep the position, and you rather work on historical document books, which are based on the law practice of your family, already having several generations. What are the most interesting cases in your family book?
Well, I'm trying really to discover a forgotten and hidden reality which is present in these papers. These papers have remained, by some miracle, I would say, between 1893 through 2014, and they somehow show the everyday life in brutal periods of history like World War I, World War II, the periods following the wars, which were also periods with a lot of enthusiasm and in every direction. And what these papers are actually showing is that there was some life, and there were human stories and human histories. So I published 5 books in Hungarian and in Serbian, and a collection in English. And the English title is trying somehow to capture what I'm doing here. And the English title is People in Spite of History. And what I'm trying to say that even in times of great history, there were small people, and their life also matters.